So, now that we have our Cutcliffe tied, I want to talk a little bit more about how I fish these. My reasoning for, I guess, well, if I'm gonna talk about this, the thing we need to really start with is the why. Why is this done with rooster hackle? Why isn't it done with a soft hackle, right? If this is a wet fly, why aren't we using soft hackle? The reason for this is because this is a fly that's meant to be manipulated, right? In this day and age, we talk a lot about dead drifting, but it's somewhat difficult to talk about how to manipulate a fly. You're going to see, if you're here, you're probably here because you saw Keegan's video. We went to the South Platte and we fished this, right? And we fished this mostly with manipulation, and it worked exceedingly well to trick a lot of very, very picky fish. Fish that get fished to every single day, over and over and over again. And the reason why this works so well is because of the stiff hackle. Stiff hackle has a bounce to it, It doesn't stay, it doesn't basically smooth over and become this really thin looking fly, right? It bounces back out. And every single time you manipulate that fly in the surface, it's going to swim and it's going to kick. The color of the hackle, the reason why I like this particular color is that it somewhat blends into the sky, right? And since you're going to be fishing this near the top, you're only going to see, the fish are only going to see a few of these hackles. And that is a good, it helps the angler because I can see all of these in contrast to the bottom of the river, right? So this fly is very visible to me, and I can see when that fly disappears or when that fly gets eaten, usually because I see the flash of the fish or I don't see it at all, right? In which case I just automatically go into a back cast, which is exactly the same as setting the hook, right? I fished this with a fixed line rod. Normally, anything from an 11 foot to 13 foot. That's mostly because that's how Cutcliffe used to fish his. You don't really understand why that makes a difference until you actually try to fish one. A 9.5 foot rod that is the normal casting rod, a normal fly casting rod, is just not going to do the work for you. It's not going to give you the manipulation crispness that you want from this. You want it to bounce, and you want it to have a certain cadence in the water, right? Because caddis swim in a pulsing manner, right? And they have their kicks, and they have their, a few legs and the antennae and everything else. And they're just doing this number. They're just kind of passing through 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 through the water. And depending on how your setup is, then you can do this better, easier, or not as easy, right? The fixed line method is by far the best way to do this. It's with use of fluorocarbon line. Fluorocarbon line is bouncy, so it has a lot of it has some qualities that just let it spring, and it moves your vibration that you put into the rod, which is, I kind of use my finger and I tap. So I'm tapping the rod, and that gets these fibers to close in the current, right? So if you can imagine this, just kind of doing this number, this boop, 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 and they're bouncing out as the water smooths it, and then as I introduce a little bit of a pause, right, these hackles kind of bounce out. That's why we use rooster. That's why rooster maintains its shape better in the water, in fast water, right? That's what Cutcliffe was all about. The art of trout fishing in rapid streams, right? So that's why he uses rooster. That's why I use rooster. It's just a better material to give a fly an animated life, So, like I said, I use my fixed line rods. Usually I use a Oni Honryu 395 or the Dragon Tail Ragnarok 400. I like those rods because they have the length that I want and they have the sensitivity. The tip section corrects very quickly, and that helps with the crispness of the movement, and I can control that a little bit better. If I'm fishing two flies, that also helps as well because I can keep both flies pretty close to the surface. The one on the dropper, a little bit more heavily hackled than this, is going to be dancing, right? It's going to be doing its dance on the surface, and this one is going to be swimming. So you can either fish this. You can fish this in a 2-team kind of a thing, or you can fish this solitarily, right? The most important factor of this is the physics of the rod itself, right? So you want a rod. If you're going to use a Euro nymphing rod, if you're going to use like a, say you're not into tenkara, or you fish places that the fish are too big for, to not have a reel, right? And we have places like that here. This works extremely well with a Euro nymphing rod, as long as the Euro nymphing rod is limber enough to cast the fluorocarbon level line. Okay, and some people call this mono rigging, whatever. You can call it whatever you want. I think that it's a fluorocarbon level line, and you're trying to cast this with a Euro nymphing rod. There are some challenges to this, that line. It works better with tenkara because tenkara has more of a flex profile, and it has less fixed sections, right? So if you can get an 11-foot Euro nymphing rod that is mid flex and fast tip, okay, that is kind of what you want, and there's not many out there. I know for the one that I use is the Syndicate rods, the Pipeline Pro. It's the very bottom of the barrel for them. I think it's their lowest model, right? But it's an 11-foot 2-weight, and it casts level line extremely well. I can cast a level line without significant headwind, right? I can cast a level line of 3.5 at least 30 feet, which is more than enough if you're going to be fishing this style. If you can stay 30 feet above the fish that you're fishing, they're probably not going to see you. So that's what I use. I use that Pipeline, Pipeline Pro. And it's an 11-foot 2-weight, mid-flex, fast tip. That is a good rod for casting fluorocarbon level line. And it does a very good job of transferring energy, especially to a caddis presentation. Unfortunately, it doesn't do very well with the smaller mayflies because you need a much faster movement for that. And I find that tenkara still works better for like a North Country spider or some other small little wet fly that you're fishing as a mayfly. As mayflies have a different cadence to them. They're moving much quicker. They're kind of undulating, and that vibration is a little bit different. And I find that the Tenkara rods are still superior in that respect. They're just a little bit more communicative. You can tap quicker, and that motion translates better with a fixed line rod. But for Caddis, this works just fine. In fact, I just came back from a trip to the South Platte, Dream Stream section of the South Platte, and this fly worked extremely well, better than I expected. Caught some very large fish with it, and it's a testament to the technique. It's a testament to the fly pattern itself, to Cutcliffe's penchants for hackle choice and everything else. And if you carry that over and try to modernize it, I think there's a lot of rewards there. Looking at old flies and reimagining what they can do, I think is part of what I like to do as a fly tyer. So, when I choose a hackle, I'm always choosing a hackle that's very glassy, that has, some character to it. This in particular is a Keo. The reason why I like Keo is because it's not as densely barbed as other hackles are. And, in the age of, dry flies and this and that, we're obsessed kind of with, how many barbs does it have? And how many flies can I tie from one neck or from one, Well, you know what? You don't really need to spend that much money on this kind of stuff, because any kind of hackle like a Metz or a Keo is going to do you for this. This is, you don't really need something that's that densely barbed. But what you do need is something that has the barb length, right? And that's where this comes in. These feathers here at the edge, some of the ones here at the top, have the fiber length that you really want. And they're somewhat stiff. The ones here at the edge are very stiff. Normally people use them for dry flies, for the tails or whatever. I don't think you should be using these. You're probably better off using spades, which are located on the saddle portion, between the neck and the saddle is the spades, and those are by far much stiffer and better for a dry fly. But these here are stiff enough for my use, and they're bouncy. They have a kind of a nice resistance to them, and that's kind of what you want for these feathers. You want them to bounce right back out. The theory of, I guess, fishing these with a folded hackle, right, is that you get kind of the shape of a caddis, or I've fished these as mayflies too. I've fished a dry fly. I'll show you here in a minute. This is the fly that I'm going to be tying next. It's a little dusty. It's been sitting on my desk for a while. This particular pattern, if I can stop being ham-fisted for 2 seconds, this is a mayfly that I like to call, it's a brown body gray hackle, and that's an ode to the first fly fishing book about Colorado waters, by Louis B. France. Right. This hackle here is exceedingly long, and it's longer than the body of the fly itself. And the reason for that is that when I put some floating on here, obviously this is tied on a lightweight hook. When I put some floating on here, this is going to flatten out like this. And it definitely does. I've seen it work. And some of it's sticking into the water, of course, but some of it's just kind of boop, and it just sits there like that. What does it look like to the fish? I'm not entirely sure. Does it look like a cripple? Maybe a crippled mayfly that's, still stuck in the shuck and can't get out? I have fished this during green drake hatches to great effect, and I honestly didn't even mean to tie them as a dry. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but the effectiveness of this is the orientation of these fibers gives it a more of a struggling look, that cone shape, and then as you kind of move that fly or don't move that fly, this kind of kicks, it has a little bit of motion there, and I think that adds to the appeal of these flies. And you need a lot of space in your fly box for them, but I'm telling you, once you start fishing them and you find how effective they are, you will make the space. This is not the biggest challenge, I think, is finding hackles, finding the roosters that will give you these feathers, right? And so far, I have found that Keo gives me the best stuff. And some of these are, this is done Grizzly, and I love this hackle in particular for this. But the hackles here are very long. This is just an awesome length here. You could probably get something similar in the batten kill, or beaver kill. Yeah, beaver kill. The beaver kill hackles are they have similar lengths profiles. Yeah, this is one of them here. This is a good one. So you get a few of these along the edges. Usually have the bigger hackle. And this is a nice color for it. This is the brown gray dun. And it looks good on the water. It functions very well. This has a higher barb count, which is kind of what you want for a dry fly, anyways. So that's a good whiting offering if you want to try that. But I like the lengths of the Keos. I like the lengths of the Mets. The old Mets are good for this. What else did I want to say? Yeah, I fish this in the surface. I pulse it. I kind of play with the angles, like how drastic is the angle? Do I want to just swim it, in line with the current and just kind of slowly move the fly across? Do I want to, swing it very drastically and just kind of move that fly across? There's a lot of things to think about, and I think that's why this style of fishing is not as popular as, let's say, a dry fly fishing or nymph fishing, which is fairly simple. All you have to say is get a good dead drift. That's it. And once you learn how to do that, you can pretty much apply that to every single pattern. But it's a spectator sport, I don't want that. I want to be involved. I want to be the reason why that fish took the fly. So those are my thoughts about cutcliffes in general, about the manipulation of cutcliffes, how I fish these, why I fish these, why I think they work. And you're welcome to sound off in the comments about your own experiences with it, your curiosity about it. Please ask me any questions. I'm here for that. So thank you very much for joining me for this very lengthy and probably repetitive discourse. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. No, but seriously, I hope you enjoyed it, and come back again.